You may or may not be familiar with the concept of no estimates. It's a different approach, a different way of thinking about work and conducting work, and it really focuses on delivering value very frequently but in small increments. So, for example, if you're familiar with a 3 week long sprint and a 2 or 3 hour session where you sit down and plan what will go into that sprint, how long you expect each one of those tickets or tasks to take, how complex they are, that kind of thing, this kind of does away with all of that. The idea with the no estimates approach is that it's very different to the traditional upfront planning. As you can probably guess from the title, the whole concept of estimates is done away with. And instead, what you focus on is actually progress, reassessment, progress, reassessment. And so, therefore, the progress has to be done in small incremental blocks. So, instead of having a 2 or 3 week long cycle, one of the things you could try, maybe for a week or so, is what could you do if you agreed to work in 1 day long cycles? You'd have to start changing your definition of done quite markedly. Being able to hand it over to a test team, that kind of thing, suddenly it's just not viable. You'd have to test it yourself. You'd have to maybe work closely with customers and stakeholders to see how the thing you're building would be used and actually utilized in real life. And that's the kind of thing that No Estimates helps create. It's that closer binding between the guys making the software, and girls obviously, and the people who the software is for. So let's take an example. Let's imagine you're building a sorting machine and you're trying to sort peanuts. Let's say, for example, you want to get rid of the bad ones and only leave the good ones. Well, in that case, typically you might have a 3 week long sprint, sit down, plan, and say, well, we plan to do X, Y, and Z, and all these different tasks, and it's going to take this long, that kind of thing. With the no estimates approach, what you would rather do is say, okay, what's the most important thing we need to do next? And this will be an iterative thing, right? So for now, the most important thing to do is probably to sort peanuts. So you sit down, you write the most basic algorithm possible to sort peanuts. That could be a console app. There's no UI, there's no user management, there's no authentication, there's no anything. It's just a press enter to start sorting. Now, obviously, you're going to have to do a bit of back end work. You have to connect things up so that it all works. But let's assume that you basically get it working. The next most important thing is a decision that the customer or the stakeholders make. Is it the UI, for example? Is it the ability to click a button? Is it the fact that, we want to sort peanuts in a different way now? We want the size to be taken account for now, rather than just the coloring or something like that. Well, you'd have to get agreement on that. You'd have to get that priority established. And that's one of the other things that No Estimates helps with. That prioritization becomes driven and built into the way you work. And also, because of that, and because of the questions it forces the developers to come up with, and the collaboration it forces with the customers and the stakeholders, you start to have a much more creative and ingrained collaboration between the people who are building the software and the people that the software is for. So let's say in this case then, the next most important thing could be that they want to try sorting something rather different to peanuts. Let's say crisps or something, right? So in that case, the simplest implementation would be press 1 to sort peanuts, press 2 to sort crisps. Still, no UI, no ability to calibrate, no ability to change the parameters of these sorts. It's just press 1 for this, press 2 for that. It's the simplest incremental improvement on what you had. Now, obviously, the next improvement then might be, well, yes, I want to sort crisps, but I want to do it, in for this customer this way and for that customer this way. Right? Well, so you could just say press 3 to do it this way and 2 to do it that way and that kind of thing. Or you could have option 3, calibrate your own system, set up a program for yourself. Now, this is where you start to become agile in the traditional classic sense of the word. Adaptive, nimble, in a position where you can respond to whatever the most important thing is next. You could work as a mob, or 5, 6 of your developers, however many there are, all on one terminal doing this together. Or you may break up into pairs or something like that, or into smaller groups, and say, well, we're going to work on this next most important thing, and we're going to work on that one. But when you're talking about getting work done in a day or 2 days, that type of thing, there's going to have to be a lot of communication. You're going to have to talk with customers, you're going to have to talk with each other, and you're going to be able to review feedback every few days. Now, the really important thing here is that by incrementally improving, you can start to find out what's useful and what's wasteful. In a sense, if it's not important enough to be the next most important thing, you don't need to think about it. You don't need to sit down and estimate how long it's going to take. You just need to know what's the most important thing to do next. If, for example, user authentication becomes really important, even though you can't calibrate the machine, well, sure, work on that next. But probably you need to be able to calibrate. Probably you need to be able to put custom searches in. It goes on, it goes on. Basically, by being driven by value, by being driven by what's important to the customer, rather than having to predict where you'll be in 2 or 3 weeks' time, the customer is essentially getting a close to real-time view of what's being done, what's important, what's coming up next, and progress. You can have a very clear picture that this is where we are, this is where we're going to be tomorrow. These are the things we learned from yesterday's session, that kind of thing. So it's very much driven by value, very much focuses on short cycles, and really gives you very rapid progress. One of the other overlooked things with this is that it helps you identify bottlenecks. If, for example, it takes you a day to deploy and test the software, you'll rapidly realize that that's not good enough. That needs to be, shrunk, that needs to be improved. So maybe the next couple of days is you working on shortening your deployment processes, finding out what the bottlenecks there are. How can we make this a one-click thing? Because this is really important that we don't spend 2 days deploying the thing when we spent 1 day on development. We need to be able to press a button and within 5 or 10 minutes be able to see the results of our work, so we can test it, so we can show the customer, so we can make sure where we're going is in the right direction. So it's a very different way of thinking. You have to get rid of this kind of perfection-based mindset where this is the definition of done, and until we hit that, it's not done, and we have to stick on it. It's about better. It's about good enough. Is this good enough? Should we make it a little bit better? Should we improve? Or actually, is this good enough that we can now work on this other thing and try and bring this up a little bit? And if you just keep going round in circles on improving the worst thing, before long you'll have a fully functioning system built by what was important to the people using that system. Something value-led and driven by what is important to your users, to your customers. So if you have thoughts, if you have kind of input, maybe you've got experience with this kind of no estimates approach, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Love to hear about people's experience with this. In my personal experience, I haven't seen a lot of teams use this approach. It definitely takes a bit of coaching because it's a very different way of thinking. But I'd love to hear your input. And yeah, if this is something you think you're interested in hearing more about, maybe I can do another video in a bit more depth. So thanks for listening. Hope it's useful, and yeah, thoughts in the comments. Take care.